Hi, I am Prabha Kaundinya, and I am a doctoral student of school psychology at Loyola University, Chicago. I have created an infographic that I wanted to share with you today, and it is titled The School Experiences of South Asian American Youth. And I'm going to screen share that as I walk you through this infographic and the message that I wanted to share with you all through this creation of this infographic. So, I wish to first thank DOSA, the Division of South Asian Americans, which is a subdivision of the Asian American Psychological Association, as well as my mentor, Moitri Chowdhury, for all their encouragement and support that they gave me in this venture. How does school feel to children and adolescents who identify as South Asian or South Asian American? What are the school experiences of these youth? What factors impact, define, and shape their lived experiences in American schools? These are some of the research questions that I sought to explore through my infographic. As a school psychologist in training, my role in the school is to be the expert who can support both educational and mental health functioning of students. So, in this capacity, I am very interested in knowing how students experience the school environment. I'm especially interested in the experiences of students from minoritized racial, ethnic, cultural, economic, and linguistic backgrounds. As a first generation immigrant from a South Asian country, and as a parent to South Asian American students myself, these questions regarding the school experiences of South Asian American youth hold personal relevance to me. As a researcher with an insider perspective to this population, I sought to begin with just these open-ended questions of exploring how do these students experience the school setting? Because unfortunately, there is not much known about South Asian and Asian American populations as a whole. So, while examining the school experiences of these youth, we have to first situate this population in the American historical and socio-political life. People who identify as South Asian or South Asian American trace their ancestry to the countries in the southern and central part of Asia. Specifically, this includes India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, and the Maldives. About 80% of South Asians in USA trace their origin to India. However, the South Asian community in US also includes members of the larger South Asian diaspora hailing from past settlement around the world, including the Caribbean, Canada, Africa, Europe, the Middle East, and other parts of Asia and Pacific Islands. So there is great heterogeneity in this community with regard to their religious, ethnic, linguistic, and cultural characteristics. So the experiences of South Asian youth is, consequently nuanced and multi-layered. Now let's talk about South Asian history and South Asian American history in the United States. South Asian migration and settlement has had a long history in USA, starting as early as the 1900s. Migration of South Asians into US has tended to occur in waves, and this was greatly boosted by the passing of the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. Ever since, individuals of South Asian origin have made significant contributions to the economic, educational, socio-political, and cultural life of USA. And yet, not much is known about these individuals and communities, especially in schools and educational institutions. The experiences of South Asian and South Asian American youth have often been overlooked and underrepresented. The little that is known about these students is often steeped in stereotypes that are faulty and pejorative, as is often the case with stereotypes in general. In effect, not much is known about South Asian or South Asian American youth and their experiences in K to 12, which is kindergarten to 12 schooling in United States. In this infographic, I seek to bring to light the various issues that impact the school experiences of South Asian American youth. Educators, school personnel, mental health professionals who interact with these youth and their families may need to be aware of these issues in order to provide more culturally competent and equitable services. Now, I use the term South Asian and South Asian American kind of interchangeably, but this is just a broader reference to students who may not be born in USA or whose families have recently migrated, but who still may have considerable years of experience studying in schools in USA, and hence may also be impacted by the factors I highlight in this infographic. This is the reason why I am using these terms of South Asian and South Asian American youth interchangeably, but they all refer to students who trace their ancestry to South Asian countries and who have considerable experience studying in the schools in USA to relate to some of the factors that I highlight in this infographic. So let's talk about numbers. As of the 2017 National Center for Educational Statistics, Asian children make up 5% of the public school enrollment, the kindergarten to 12 public school enrollment, or the school-age population that is usually regarded as between 5 to 17 years of age. So while South Asians make up like one of the subgroups within the Asian American umbrella, unfortunately, federal mandates do not require granular data on Asian subgroups, which means that we do not have an official count of the number of school-age children that identify as South Asian or South Asian American. South Asian Americans Leading Together is a nonprofit organization that collects data on South Asian communities in the USA. And they have reported in 2019 that there were about 5.4 million South Asians living in USA. And this constitutes less than 2% of the current population of USA. So if we extrapolate that percentage, the 2%, to the school-aged population, we can say that South Asian American students make up roughly 2% of the school-age population in United States. So despite being a minuscule minority, South Asian Americans are the fastest growing minority in USA and as I highlighted earlier, have made significant contributions to the academic, social, economic, and political life of this country. So let us go into exploring the issues that South Asian American students face in their school life. So, in general, South Asian American youth's voices have been poorly represented in literature. This means that there is a paucity, a lack of research and understanding of South Asian American student school experiences. Now, having said that, there is some emergent work with this population that has come about mostly in the later half of this decade, say from 2015 or so to right now. And what I present to you is an amalgam of the literature that exists to date that can give you a picture of the various issues that South Asian American students face in school, home, and society. I have to state a caveat that much of this emergent research that I present here has been based on college age youth, or they may represent adult recollections of their kindergarten to 12 school experiences. So this only goes to further highlight the paucity of research in hearing South Asian students' own voices about their own school experiences. So the first of these issues, or probably one of the most significant of these issues, is the model minority myth. What is the model minority myth? So the model minority stereotype is an overgeneralized stereotype, like all stereotypes, which treats all Asians and all South Asians as uniformly and universally successful. Now, the term model minority was first coined in 1966 by sociologist William Peterson in an article that he wrote for the New York Times to describe the success that Japanese Americans achieved despite the discriminations they endured in American society at that time. The marked minority stereotype is a significant aspect of the experience of individuals from other Asian American subgroups, including South Asian Americans, residing not only in USA, but several other global North countries. Now, there is a deceptiveness to the stereotype, and that lies in the fact that it appears very innocuous at first. I mean, imagine calling a community as a model for others to follow. Isn't that high praise? However, it is offensive, inaccurate, and very dangerous, especially in the classroom. This is because while on the surface, it appears to perpetuate the idea that Asians and South Asian American students are naturally intelligent, capable, highly educated, successful, obedient, hardworking, ambitious, and self-disciplined. However, under the surface, it carries with it the expectation that all individuals all of these individuals are homogeneous in their achievement and do not need any form of support, help, assistance that would normally be available to peers from white or other minority backgrounds. So it sweeps all Asians into the rigid gridlock of high achievement and high expectations with no fair consideration for their very human needs for connection, support, and acceptance. So it is a misguided myth because it masks the great diversity that exists within the South Asian American population. It effectively neglects the experiences of those who struggle academically, economically, or who experience mental health difficulties within this population. Moreover, it trivializes the racism and discrimination that many South Asian American students experience in schools or in workplaces, in professions, in social life on a daily basis. It also limits their upward mobility. And hence, this stereotype of the model minority is not really a high praise, but it is extremely deceptive and hence, and not only deceptive, it's inaccurate and hence it has been called as a myth. So, despite this, the model minority myth, it is widely shared among Americans, and many Americans expect South Asian Americans to conform to the stereotype. Not only that, studies show that many South Asian Americans have themselves internalized the stereotype. So they talk about the dual pathways. There are two pathways by which this stereotype, the internalization of this stereotype operates. On the one hand, the internalization of this myth bestows pride. But on the other hand, it also creates pressure. Scholars have theorized that South Asian American experience social marginality as immigrants. And this leads them to strongly endorse these idealized cultural identities. And so they kind of internalize this, what appears to be a very positive stereotype because of this need for belonging, which is caused by the social marginalization. And so when these recent immigrant populations internalize this seemingly positive myth or stereotype, they are likely to experience both pride and pressure to live to the expectations. So while there is a sense of pride that they're even being held to such high expectations, there's also the pressure to conform, and that can lower resilience and create higher likelihood for mental health problems. Now, then we move on to the next issue of parental involvement. So just like with other Asian American subgroups, South Asian American students report high levels of parental involvement. While parental involvement might have its protective factors, it can also heighten family conflict between parents and their children, particularly regarding education and careers. So therefore, while South Asian American students may seemingly be performing well academically, of course, not all of them, their educational socialization process might still be fraught with emotional stress, which often does not come up to the surface and is often not shared with the people who can help them, namely educators, mental health professionals, and other school staff. So basically, there might be like a suffering in silence. Then we talk about the heavy issue of discrimination, which is all too familiar, uh, sadly, in the American context. Many South Asian American students and individuals experience racism and race based discrimination in education, profession, and social life on a daily basis. Studies with South Asian American school students have found that perceived discrimination by peers and teachers are often a reality for these students and can negatively impact their motivation, self esteem, as well as achievement. Additionally, many South Asian American students may experience Islamophobia along with xenophobia that has been prevalent since 9/11, and it might be targeted especially towards those who wear external paraphernalia that is customary to Islamic practice. And hence, Sikhs, a subgroup of South Asians who often wear turbans on their heads, are often mistaken for Muslims and have been under attack in public and private spaces, including the very unfortunate recent shooting at an Indianapolis FedEx facility. South Asian American youth are often subject to other racial slurs in the schools, such as being called as curryhead and other such slurs. Furthermore, the model minority myth is such a significant part of the South Asian student experiences that it might mask racism and discrimination experienced by these students within the racialized context of American schools. So, in other words, while South Asian American students, especially in schools which have lower concentration of these students, might be held to like very positive stereotypes and looked upon as though they have no psychological or academic or social emotional needs whatsoever that need to be catered to, they might be experiencing racism and discrimination, which also is kind of less credible to believe and less addressed or more neglected. Then moving on to the bigger issue of systems level awareness or sensitivity to the needs of these students, we talk about factors like the cultural competency of educators. And part of the neglect, the implicit bias, and the discriminatory experiences that these students face in the school comes from a lack of cultural knowledge and awareness that educators possess in understanding the cultural backgrounds of South Asian American students and their families. In one pilot study, a survey of white monolingual teachers who taught South Asian American students, nearly 75% of the surveyed teachers reported being comfortable or extremely comfortable supporting the needs of South Asian American students. Yet, when that same group of respondents, of teachers, were asked about their cultural knowledge or proficiency, cultural proficiency regarding these students, less than half of the survey teachers reported possessing even some cultural knowledge or proficiency regarding these youth. So, most educators in American schools we know are often white and female, and there's a lack of diversity and representation among educators in general. And this might hurt the cultural competence of schools and school personnel in catering to the unique needs of South Asian American students. And then we have to bring about the very important issue of shame and stigma towards help seeking, because this is a key factor that can create a barrier to mental health care and help seeking behavior. South Asian cultures reinforce an internal fortitude, and they reinforce this sense of keeping it all in and chastise help seeking. So, even within the South Asian community, mental health needs are looked down upon, and the judgment and discrimination that can come from one's own community members can impact how individuals from South Asian communities choose to seek help. Furthermore, the model minority myth that we explored earlier plays havoc with South Asian American help seeking, because it suggests that in terms of mental illness, this ethnic group has little or no social or psychological problems whatsoever, and they seem to have assimilated well to life in United States, which may not be the case. On top of that, when South Asian Americans, especially youth, when they internalize the model minority myth, it creates insurmountable barriers to help seeking for these same students. And then we talk about acculturative stress versus ethnic identity. We all know that adolescence is a very important period for identity development. However, many South Asian youth may be caught between conflicting pressures to assimilate versus the ability to form or the need to form a very unique cultural, racial, ethnic identity. There's like dual pressures of needing to feel unique as well as needing to integrate that just is exacerbated in the adolescent drama. So the kind of racial socialization practices or racial messages that are passed on from South Asian American parents to children within South Asian American families can impact healthy ethnic identity formation. Also, since we know that this is a recent immigrant community, where a lot of the parents might be first generation immigrants versus the students in the schools right now may be second generation immigrants. There are intergenerational acculturative gaps, and this can make it harder for children to develop a healthy ethnic and cultural pride, and which can affect their ethnic identity development and their entire, holistic identity development. Then we talk about, racial and gender role socialization, because again, here, the parental messages that are passed on, the racial socialization messages that are passed on from South Asian American parents to their children might bestow both ethnic pride, but it may also be linked to race-related stress and adjustment difficulties among these youth. It's also important to recognize here the traditional patriarchy in South Asian American or South Asian cultures, which impose strict control and restrictions on South Asian American girls, which can restrict their upward mobility. So, in conclusion, when we look at all these factors, I wish to just highlight that the continued invisibility of South Asian American youth in research and representation masks the diverse needs, struggles, and racialized experiences of these youth. So through my infographic here, I have endeavored to merely present a bird's eye view of some of the key factors that might impact South Asian American student experiences in American schools and in American society. But this is just what has been researched to date, and all of this just represents like a scratch on the surface. There are several other issues that may impact the school experiences of these youth that need to be further explored. So we need both a broader and a deeper understanding of these issues impacting the school experiences of these youth. That is why there is a greater need for research and understanding and exploration of the educational, social, and lived experiences of South Asian American individuals, because this understanding can be crucial to their psychological well-being. Thank you very much.